The room was quiet in the way that only corporate rooms get quiet, controlled, polite, slightly tense. Glass walls, a long table, muted colors, and people pretending to listen more carefully than they actually were. Ethan stood near the screen, remote in his hand, finishing his presentation. His voice was steady, his slides were clean, his logic made sense. He had prepared for this. Every number was checked, every assumption backed by data. And based on this, he said, pausing just enough to sound confident, we can increase efficiency by restructuring the workflow across 2 teams instead of 3. A few heads nodded. Someone wrote something down. The manager leaned back slightly, arms crossed, expression neutral. Ethan felt that familiar feeling again. Not rejection, not approval either, just nothing. The kind of silence that doesn't validate you, but doesn't openly challenge you either. The kind of silence that quietly kills momentum. Then it happened. A voice from the side of the table, casual, slightly louder, slightly more relaxed. Yeah, so basically what Ethan's saying is, we're overcomplicating things. If we just streamline it into 2 teams, we cut friction and move faster. Same idea, fewer words, more certainty. The room shifted. The manager leaned forward this time. Someone else nodded more visibly. Another person added, "That actually makes a lot of sense." Ethan didn't move, but inside, something tightened. He looked at the screen for a second longer than necessary, then slowly lowered the remote. His idea had just been accepted, but not from him. And the strange part was, no one even noticed the transition. Because this wasn't about the idea. It never was. Across the table, Daniel sat still. No notebook, no laptop, just his hands resting calmly, eyes moving slightly as he observed the room. He didn't react when Ethan spoke. He didn't react when the other guy reframed the idea, but he saw everything. The shift in posture, the change in tone, the moment control moved from one person to another. Ethan glanced at him for a brief second. Daniel didn't look back. He just kept watching, like he already understood something Ethan was only beginning to feel. And in that moment, without anyone saying it out loud, a quiet truth settled into the room. Power wasn't about being right. It was about who the room felt was right, and that feeling could be controlled. Ethan had always believed in a simple formula: work hard, stay consistent, be reliable, and eventually it pays off. That belief had carried him through college, through his first job, through long nights of quiet effort that no one really saw, but everyone benefited from. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he didn't need to be. He trusted that competence would speak for itself. But over time, something started to feel off. Not dramatically, not in a way that you can point to and say, this is unfair. It was more subtle than that. He would notice how certain people got attention faster, how their ideas landed heavier even when they weren't necessarily better, how they interrupted more freely, spoke with more certainty, and somehow weren't punished for it. If Ethan did the same thing, it felt forced, slightly awkward, like he was stepping out of character. But for them, it was natural. And the results showed. They moved up faster, got visibility, built influence, while Ethan stayed where he was, respected but not prioritized, trusted but not followed. There's a specific kind of frustration that comes from this. Not the loud kind, the quiet one. The kind that builds slowly in the background, where you start questioning things you never questioned before. Ethan began replaying conversations in his head, meetings, small interactions, even casual hallway discussions. Why did they listen to him more? Why did that idea land better? I said the same thing, didn't I? At first, he tried to fix it the obvious way. He prepared more, spoke clearly, added more data, but nothing really changed. Because the problem wasn't in what he was saying, it was in something deeper, something he couldn't fully see yet. And then there was Daniel. Same office, same environment, but a completely different presence. Daniel didn't talk much, didn't try to stand out, didn't chase conversations or dominate meetings. But somehow, when he spoke, the room adjusted. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. People didn't interrupt him, they didn't rush him, they didn't question him the same way. It wasn't respect in the traditional sense, it was something else, something quieter, something that didn't need validation to exist. Ethan couldn't explain it yet, but he could feel the difference. And slowly, a thought began to form. Maybe success here isn't about being the most capable person in the room. Maybe it's about becoming the person the room unconsciously adjusts to. The difference between Ethan and Daniel wasn't obvious at first.
If you looked quickly, you might even think they were similar. Both calm, both professional, neither overly loud or aggressive. But if you watched closely, really closely, the contrast started to reveal itself in small, almost invisible moments. Ethan spoke to be understood. When someone questioned him, he clarified. When someone disagreed, he explained further. His instinct was always to reduce confusion, to make sure everyone was on the same page. It came from a good place, but it had a side effect. The more he explained, the more it felt like he was asking for permission to be right. Daniel didn't do that. When someone questioned him, he didn't rush to respond. He paused, sometimes for a second longer than what felt comfortable, just enough to create a slight tension in the room. And then he would speak, briefly. No extra explanation, no emotional tone, just a clean, controlled response. And if someone still didn't agree, he didn't chase them. He let the disagreement sit there. That was the difference. Ethan tried to resolve tension. Daniel used it. There was one moment Ethan couldn't forget, a meeting where a senior manager challenged Daniel's proposal, not aggressively, but firmly. "I don't think that approach will work," the manager said. Ethan expected Daniel to defend his idea, add more context, push back logically. But Daniel didn't do any of that. He just looked at the manager, not confrontational, not submissive either, just steady. A pause. Then he said calmly, "It depends on what outcome you're prioritizing," and stopped. That was it. No follow-up, no justification. The room went quiet for a moment, and something subtle happened. The pressure shifted. Now the manager had to explain himself. Now the room was waiting on him. Daniel didn't win the argument by adding more. He won by doing less. Ethan felt that moment deeply, because it broke something he had always believed, that more communication leads to more control. But what he was seeing now suggested the opposite. Control wasn't coming from saying more. It was coming from saying less at the right time. And more importantly, from not needing immediate validation. The person who needs the least approval often holds the most power. Ethan didn't fully understand it yet, but he was starting to see the pattern. And once you see a pattern like this, you can't unsee it. At first, Ethan thought these were just isolated moments, different personalities, different communication styles, nothing deeper than that. But the more he paid attention, the more consistent the pattern became. It wasn't just one meeting, it wasn't just one person, it was everywhere. In how decisions were made, in who got interrupted and who didn't, in whose ideas were questioned and whose were accepted almost immediately. And slowly, a realization began to form. This wasn't random. There was a structure to it, an invisible system that determined how influence moved inside the room. And that system didn't operate on fairness. It didn't reward effort. It didn't prioritize accuracy. It responded to something else, something more instinctive, more psychological. Ethan started noticing how people reacted not just to words, but to presence, tone, timing, certainty, emotional control. These factors were shaping outcomes more than logic ever did. And the most unsettling part was this. The people who seemed to understand this weren't necessarily the most ethical ones. They were the ones who could detach, the ones who didn't hesitate before speaking, the ones who didn't need to be liked in order to be heard, the ones who could say less and still dominate the interaction. That's when the question changed. Ethan stopped asking, "Why am I not being recognized?" and started asking something more dangerous. What kind of behavior actually creates power? Because whatever the answer was, it wasn't what he had been taught, and it definitely wasn't what most people openly admit. Across the room, Daniel closed his notebook, though Ethan never saw him write anything in it. A small movement, quiet, controlled, but it carried weight. People noticed, even when they didn't realize they were noticing. And in that moment, Ethan understood something unsettling. Power wasn't just about what you do. It was about how others unconsciously adjust to you. And some people already mastered that game. Later that night, the office was almost empty. The usual noise, keyboards, low conversations, distant phones was gone. Just a soft hum of air conditioning and the glow of screens left on standby. Ethan sat alone, scrolling, not casually, not distracted, focused.
The kind of focus that comes when something doesn't make sense and your mind refuses to let it go. He wasn't looking for motivation. He wasn't looking for advice. He was trying to understand a pattern. Why certain people moved differently. Why some voices carried more weight even when they said less. That's when he came across it. A term repeated across multiple studies, articles, behavioral reports. Not loud, not sensational, just consistent. The Dark Triad. He read slowly, not because it was complex, but because it felt familiar. Narcissism, not loud arrogance, but quiet self-focus. Machiavellianism, not manipulation in movies, but subtle strategy in conversations. Psychopathy, not violence, but emotional detachment under pressure. Ethan's fingers stopped scrolling because suddenly this wasn't theory anymore. This was behavior he had already seen. In meetings, in conversations, in the way some people spoke without hesitation while others filtered every word. He leaned back slightly. A thought crossed his mind, uncomfortable but clear. What if this isn't about personality? What if this is about how power actually works? The screen dimmed for a second, and in that quiet moment, Ethan wasn't learning something new. He was recognizing something that had always been there, just never named. The next morning, nothing looked different. Same office, same people, same routines. But Ethan's perception had shifted. And once perception changes, reality starts revealing different layers. In the meeting that followed, he didn't focus on what people were saying. He watched how they were saying it. A colleague spoke, "Good idea," but his voice dipped slightly at the end of sentences, like he was leaving space for approval. Another interrupted. No hesitation, no softening, no adjustment, just direct. And the reaction was immediate. People leaned in more, not because the idea was better, but because it felt more certain. Ethan felt it clearly now. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was friction. Some people carried it, some didn't. He noticed it in himself too. Every time he spoke, there was a split-second pause in his mind, a filter, a check. And even though it lasted less than a second, it changed everything. Because that moment of internal resistance leaked into his voice, into his timing, into how others perceived him. Across the table, Daniel sat the same way he always did, relaxed, still, observing. When someone asked for his opinion, he didn't respond immediately. A pause, not forced, not calculated, just natural. Then he spoke. Let's simplify it. Nothing more. No justification, no explanation. And somehow that was enough. The conversation shifted around him. Ethan watched closely. There was no rush in Daniel, no need to prove, no visible hesitation. And for the first time, Ethan understood something clearly.
Daniel wasn't trying to sound confident. He simply didn't have the internal noise that made others uncertain. The realization stayed with Ethan longer than he expected, not because it was complicated, but because it was uncomfortable. It forced him to look at himself differently. Later that day, during a smaller discussion, he caught himself mid-sentence. He was explaining again, adding context that no one had asked for, softening his point before anyone challenged it. And suddenly, he saw it from the outside, not as clarity, but as hesitation, as if he was asking the room, "Is this okay?" He stopped talking for a second. No one noticed. The conversation moved on. But inside, something shifted, because now he could see the pattern clearly. His need to be understood, his need to be fair, his need to avoid conflict, all of it created delay, and delay reduced impact. Meanwhile, the people who didn't carry that weight, they moved faster, spoke cleaner, took space without asking for it, and the system rewarded that, not intentionally, but consistently. Ethan looked around the room again. Nothing had changed, but everything made more sense now. This wasn't about good or bad people. It was about behavior that aligned with how humans instinctively respond to power. And the uncomfortable part was this: the traits he had avoided his whole life were the same ones quietly shaping the hierarchy around him. A week later, the opportunity came. Not announced loudly, not framed as competition, just a subtle shift in conversation. A new leadership role opening within the team. Discussions started informally. Names floated around. Ethan's name was mentioned. So was someone else's. Someone slightly more aggressive, slightly more visible. Ethan prepared the way he always did. He refined his work, organized his achievements, focused on team contributions. When the conversation happened, he spoke clearly, calmly. He emphasized collaboration, stability, long-term consistency.
Everything made sense. Everything was correct. Then the other candidate spoke. Less structured, less detailed, but more direct. "I've already been handling most of the responsibilities anyway," he said casually. No hesitation, no softening. A slight exaggeration, but delivered with certainty. The room didn't challenge it immediately, because certainty creates momentum. Ethan felt it again, that shift, subtle, almost invisible, but real. He started to respond, to clarify, to correct the framing. But something stopped him. A pause. For the first time, not driven by hesitation, but by awareness. He glanced briefly across the room. Daniel was there, watching, not interfering, not reacting, just observing the dynamic unfold. Ethan looked back at the conversation, and instead of reacting immediately, he stayed silent. Not out of weakness, but because for the first time, he was trying to understand the game before playing his move. The moment you stop reacting is the moment you start seeing control. By now, Ethan wasn't just listening in conversations, he was watching them. Not the obvious parts, the words, the ideas, the outcomes, but the invisible layer underneath. The small things. Who interrupted whom? Who waited? Who leaned forward? And who leaned back? It started becoming clear that conversations weren't equal exchanges. They were silent negotiations of control. One afternoon, during a cross-team discussion, Ethan noticed something he would have ignored before. A senior associate was speaking, explaining a plan in detail, carefully structured, almost rehearsed. Halfway through, another voice cut in. Not aggressive, not rude, just unfiltered. "Let's not overcomplicate it." The interruption wasn't justified, it wasn't even necessary, but it worked. The room shifted instantly. The original speaker lost momentum. His voice softened slightly when he resumed, and the person who interrupted, without adding anything substantial, now held the frame of the conversation. Ethan felt it happen in real time.
Not logically, physically, like a subtle shift in gravity. He started noticing patterns everywhere. The way certain people held eye contact a second longer, the way they didn't rush to respond, the way they allowed silence to sit without trying to fix it. These weren't random behaviors, they were signals, and the brain was constantly reading them. Certainty, control, emotional neutrality. Ethan realized something unsettling. People weren't responding to what was being said. They were responding to how stable the person felt while saying it. And stability could be performed. The strongest position in a conversation is the one that doesn't react. Once you see a pattern like this, it's impossible to ignore it. And naturally, Ethan tried to apply it. But awareness doesn't immediately translate into control. The next time he spoke in a meeting, he tried to slow down. He paused slightly before responding. But the pause felt forced, not natural like Daniel's. Heavy, like he was holding something back instead of simply choosing silence. When someone interrupted him, he didn't immediately adjust like before. He tried to hold his ground, but his tone changed just slightly, tighter, and people could feel it. The conversation moved on anyway, not because his point was wrong, but because his presence didn't hold the space. Later, during another discussion, he tried being more direct, less explanation, more certainty. But again, it didn't land the same way, because internally, he wasn't certain. He was trying to sound certain. And the difference between the two is almost invisible, but impossible to fake. By the end of the day, Ethan felt the frustration building again. Not the old frustration of being ignored. This was different. This was the frustration of knowing something, but not being able to execute it. He sat at his desk, staring at nothing in particular, because now the problem was clearer than ever. It wasn't just what he said, it was what was happening inside him while he said it. You can't control the room if you can't control your own internal state. Daniel never explained anything. That was the first thing Ethan realized. He didn't teach, he didn't advise, he didn't correct people. He just existed differently. And somehow, that was enough. One evening, as most of the office started clearing out, Ethan found himself in the same room as Daniel. No meeting, no agenda, just a quiet overlap of presence. A junior employee walked in, slightly nervous, holding a file. "Hey, I just wanted to confirm something about the report." His voice had that familiar uncertainty, the same kind Ethan used to carry into every conversation. Daniel looked at him, calm, neutral. The employee continued explaining, over-explaining, adding unnecessary details. Daniel didn't interrupt.
Didn't guide. Just listened. And after a few seconds, he said, "Send it." That was it. No feedback, no correction, no validation. The employee paused for a second, then nodded. "Okay, yeah, I'll send it." And he left. Ethan watched the entire interaction. There was something strange about it. Daniel hadn't solved anything, hadn't given clarity, but somehow he had taken control of the interaction completely. Because he didn't enter the other person's emotional state. He didn't match the uncertainty. He stayed stable. And that stability forced the other person to adjust. Ethan felt it clearly now. Daniel wasn't controlling people. He was controlling himself so completely that others aligned automatically. The most powerful form of control is the one that doesn't look like control at all. That night, Ethan didn't open any articles, didn't search for explanations. He didn't need them anymore. Because now he had something more valuable than theory. He had patterns. Real ones. Observed, repeated, confirmed. He started replaying moments again, but this time not as confusion, as data. Daniel's pauses, his lack of urgency, his ability to let silence exist without discomfort, and most importantly, his complete absence of the need to be liked in that moment. Ethan realized something that changed everything. Daniel wasn't trying to win interactions. He was setting the conditions where winning happened naturally. And those conditions were internal. Emotional control, detachment from approval, precision in timing. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. For the first time, the path forward didn't feel vague. It felt specific. Not easy, but clear. This wasn't about becoming aggressive or manipulative or someone else entirely. This was about removing internal noise, because that noise was the only thing standing between him and control. He closed his eyes for a second, and a thought settled in, quiet but sharp. If I can control what happens inside me, the outside will start responding differently. For the first time since all of this started, Ethan wasn't reacting to the system anymore. He was beginning to understand it. And once you understand the system, you don't fight it, you use it. Ethan stopped labeling what he was seeing as personality, because personality felt fixed, and this wasn't. This was behavioral, adjustable, repeatable. The next few days, he didn't try to change anything externally. He didn't force confidence, didn't try to dominate conversations. Instead, he focused on something smaller. What was happening before he spoke? That tiny moment inside his mind, where thoughts rushed in, where doubt appeared, where he edited himself. He started catching it. Not stopping it yet, just noticing it. And once you notice something consistently, it begins to lose control over you. In one meeting, someone asked for his input unexpectedly. Normally, Ethan would respond immediately, fill the gap, keep things moving. But this time, he paused. Not to perform, but because he was watching his own reaction. There it was. The urge to speak quickly. The instinct to sound clear. The pressure to be right. He let it pass. Then spoke. Slower. Cleaner. We're looking at the wrong variable. He stopped. The room didn't react immediately. And for a split second, his old instinct came back. Say more. Explain it. But he didn't. He let the sentence sit there. And something subtle happened. People leaned in. Not dramatically, just enough. Because now they had to engage with him, not the other way around. Ethan felt it clearly. This wasn't about becoming cold, it was about removing unnecessary emotional noise. And once that noise reduced, his words carried more weight. Not because they changed, but because he did. Power isn't always added. Sometimes it's revealed when you stop interfering with yourself. The shift didn't feel dramatic. There was no sudden confidence, no transformation moment, just a quiet change in how Ethan processed interactions. Earlier, every conversation had a hidden question behind it. Do they agree with me? Now, that question started fading, and a different one replaced it. What position am I creating right now? It was subtle, but it changed everything. In a team discussion, two people disagreed over direction. Ethan would have normally stepped in to balance things, to resolve tension. But this time, he watched first. Let them speak. Let them reveal their assumptions. let the conversation stretch slightly longer than comfortable. Then he spoke. Not to resolve the conflict, but to reframe it. We're arguing outcomes without agreeing on the priority. Silence. Both of them looked at him, because now the conversation had shifted, not emotionally, structurally. Ethan didn't push further, didn't take sides, just introduced a new frame and stepped back. And the discussion reorganized itself around that frame. That's when it became real for him. Control doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from positioning better. He wasn't trying to be liked anymore. And strangely, that made him harder to ignore. The moment you stop chasing agreement, you start influencing direction. Ethan decided to test it deliberately, not randomly, not emotionally, but consciously. In the next meeting, he chose one thing. He wouldn't rush, no matter what. The discussion started normally. Ideas moved quickly, people spoke over each other slightly, the usual rhythm. Ethan waited, not passively, actively observing, tracking who was speaking, how they were speaking, where the conversation was going. Then, at a moment where the discussion started looping, he spoke. Let's pause. The room didn't stop immediately, but his tone was calm, not loud, not forceful, just stable. And slowly, the noise reduced. He continued. We're repeating the same point in different ways. Again, he stopped. No over-explanation, no justification, just enough. And this time, no one interrupted, because his delivery didn't invite interruption. It didn't seek validation. It assumed control. Ethan felt something new in that moment. Not confidence, control. A quieter, more stable form of presence. And the reaction around him confirmed it. People adjusted without being told to. When your internal state is stable, your external influence becomes automatic. The change wasn't dramatic. No one suddenly treated Ethan like a leader overnight, but the difference was there. Small, consistent, noticeable. People interrupted him less. They listened slightly longer. They didn't rush to fill his pauses anymore, because his pauses no longer felt empty. They felt intentional. That was the key difference. Earlier, silence meant uncertainty. Now, silence felt like control. In one conversation, someone tried to cut him off mid-sentence. A week ago, Ethan would have stopped, adjusted, let it go. This time, he didn't. Not aggressively, just continued speaking. Same tone, same pace, and the other person stopped instead. Not because Ethan overpowered him, but because his presence didn't collapse under pressure. Ethan noticed it immediately, that moment, that shift. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. Power isn't about dominating others, it's about not losing yourself in the interaction. Across the room, Daniel sat quietly as always, observing. No visible reaction, but for a brief second, his eyes met Ethan's. And there was something there. Not approval, not surprise, just recognition. As if he'd been watching this change, long before Ethan realized it himself. The real test isn't small moments, it's what happens when the stakes rise. The room felt different that day. Not louder, not more crowded, just heavier. A senior leadership discussion, decisions that actually mattered, the kind where outcomes didn't just stay in slides, they changed roles, responsibilities, visibility. Ethan sat at the table quieter than usual, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was watching everything first. The conversation started predictably. Different opinions, slight disagreements, subtle attempts to position ideas as priorities. But underneath it, there was tension. Not obvious, controlled. The kind of tension where everyone is trying to influence the direction without appearing like they're trying. Ethan felt the old instinct rising again. Jump in early, establish presence, prove value. But this time, he didn't move. He let others speak. Watched who pushed harder than necessary, who over-explained, who tried to dominate, and who actually controlled the room. Because now he knew those two things weren't the same. At one point, the discussion started drifting, people repeating similar arguments, energy scattering. This was the moment where conversations usually became chaotic. And earlier, this is where Ethan would have tried to fix everything. But now, he waited. Not passively, precisely, because timing was part of control. Across the table, Daniel sat the same way as always, still, unaffected. Not trying to take over, but completely aware when the moment would come. Ethan noticed something subtle. Daniel wasn't reacting to the conversation. He was waiting for the structure of it to weaken, because that's when influence becomes easiest. The strongest move isn't early, it's timed. The opening appeared quietly, not announced, just a slight gap in the conversation, where no one was clearly leading anymore, where ideas were present, but direction wasn't. Ethan spoke. Not louder, just clean. "We're solving the wrong problem." The room paused.